Hello, hello. Welcome to the Black Sheep livestream. It's me, Salome Siboney, co-founder of the Black Sheep, writer, artist, and speaker. And I'm going to be speaking a lot about one of my favorite things today, which is beauty. And one of my least favorite things, which is the lack of beauty in our society on a cultural level, and also the lack of appreciation for it on an individual level. So we're going to be going deep into some philosophy in this live stream because it is my belief that we fundamentally do not understand what beauty is anymore. And I've got a lot of theories for why that is. Partly, I think beauty has largely been communicated through religion and culture. And as we've moved into a more secular society where you're free to practice your religion, but there is no national religion, we don't have those stories to understand the role that beauty plays in our society if it is not in that religious context. But that doesn't mean that beauty doesn't still play an important role. Just like there are facets of religion that are important, whether or not you actually believe in the faith claims, like community, things like this. And so in the same way that we're kind of in this place with religion where we realize, okay, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, yes, the earth isn't 7,000 years old or whatever, and no proof that Jesus was able to resurrect as a zombie or whatever and like live after death and walk around and do all these things. Like, yes, there's faith claims that we might reject, but that doesn't mean that the technology of religion, meaning making tool that helps us convey stories and values to each other that help us make sense of our world and form community, isn't still important. And so we have to do the same thing that I think we have to do with religion, which is figure out what those important things are and separate them out from the things that aren't important and don't work for us anymore. And so, things like Bible passages that you don't want to live by, like mixing cloths or whatever, these kind of things that it's like, oh, that's not really important. Well, right, we already do this process of discerning what we think no longer carries relevance to us today. And so let's do that for beauty as well, which is beauty may not only be something that is tied up in a religious deity for us, but that doesn't mean it's not still important. And so this is where we are now. You are here on the map, the place between having a religious structure that fully explains your world and has all its problems, but at least you're contained within that context, and the place where you have found what needs to be revived from that religious story, but you've also let go of the things that were causing harm to you and people in society from that religious story. So you're in the middle of that. The part where we haven't quite figured out what we actually need to save, whether we need to save that. I know there's a lot of talk about like, oh, let's just all be religious again. Like, I can tell you right now, that's not going to work for me. So I'm going to push ahead with the process of finding what is good and keeping it. And beauty is one of those things. So this is a weird thing to me because there's actually a huge amount of history, of thought behind the role that beauty plays in society and what beauty means beyond just a pretty picture or an attractive person. And somehow, and this is like some confirmation for the idiocracy hypothesis, which is maybe the problem is that we're all just getting kind of dumb for one reason or another. But when I was doing a little research on the tradition of thought around beauty, I was kind of shocked at how rich it actually is. Because I kind of just had the sense like, I don't see anybody talking about this. And So there must not be that much of a tradition around this idea of beauty as like a philosophy. But wow, there really is. And so I'm going to try to convey some of that to you so that you can use that in your life, because I've found it very helpful to switch away from the more contemporary modern view, which is beauty is just entirely subjective. Beauty is whatever you make it. Beauty is an oppressive standard sold to us by advertisers. All of these things that are completely stripped of that more powerful, sacred, universal aspect that beauty has and has historically had. And so as you come to this more complex viewing of beauty, you can actually add it to your life. And my theory is that this is part of why things are ugly. And I don't mean just, oh, the buildings or whatever, but the culture. I don't know if it's just me, but I kind of feel like our culture is ugly in some ways. I mean, the political polarization, the demonization of people who don't believe the same things that you do, even though that has existed in this country since its beginning. And just kind of like the ethos of doom and failure and everything is bad that you kind of see as the general cultural narrative, at least around people my age, where the common refrain is just like, things are bad. And it's like, I don't know, are they really? Or is that just your experience of things? Like, is that just your life that's kind of just bad? Because again, as I always say, like, just look at things on a longer time frame and your life probably isn't that bad. Things are probably not that bad as compared to like being a peasant that has to eat gruel all the time and doesn't have medicine, or being a soldier that is getting operated on without anesthetics, or I don't know, being a slave, something that actually still exists in the world. So pretty quickly, when you expand out the view with which you use to judge your life as being like, oh, things are bad, like, oh, this country's bad, it kind of gets hard to defend that view. So part of the remedy for that is to actively seek beauty. And this is what I think our culture has largely lost. And so I am curious if you guys have seen the same phenomenon, which is just like beauty becoming just a thing that is not really discussed. And if it is discussed, it's discussed in this sense of like, it is entirely subjective. It is whatever you make it. There's no point in discussing it because it's entirely subjective. And so you get into this place where there really is no room for a shared experience of beauty in our culture. Maybe in like a smaller subculture, right? Like you and your friends go to a concert and have that experience of like, wow, this is so beautiful. We're all vibing to the same music. That's that experience, right? And so we do still have these pockets of beauty, but then very quickly, like you go home and everything seems to just go back to the same kind of monotony. And is that really the only way we can experience beauty, is in these peak moments where we've taken time off to go to a concert with our friends who've been able to make all our schedules aligned? Like, if that's the only times that we're going to have that like really genuine experience of beauty, we're not going to reap the benefits of it. And so I'm going to discuss how we can do that, because it is my theory that yes, you can talk about like the political problems and like very much there are bad ideas. And I'm going to discuss how those ideas are bad, partly because they eschew beauty. But nonetheless, there's all these other problems, right? It's not like I'm like, hey, I figured out the one thing. If we just all looked at art more, everything would be okay. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that we might actually be neglecting a much easier route to having a more uplifted personal experience and then thus culture. Because my view of cultural change is one that starts with the individual. I'm very opposed to the idea that like, oh, we're going to change the whole culture and then the individuals will be changed in it. Who's gonna do the changing? All the depressed, upset, disgruntled people, they're gonna do the changing to make the culture not the way that they are, but they haven't made the change in themselves. That kind of top-down approach just doesn't even work in your own life. If you just look at your own life as an example, how often does something else external make a true change in your life, as opposed to an internal change that you maintain and then thus maintain the external changes in your life? And that just follows like normal principles of behavioral change also. Oh, I love to hear that I am speaking directly to your heart. Good. I am glad I'm not alone in seeking beauty and thinking that we need a lot more of it. Okay, so as a reminder, guys, subscribe to We the Black Sheep so that you get notified of these live streams, because I don't want you to miss them. I think it's really fun when we can participate. So let me know in the chat, drop down if you have experienced this kind of like sense that things are getting a little ugly. Like I think this kind of like aggression in our culture, like where everybody's just kind of on edge and like ready to insult each other. And you see it from our leaders too, right? Like I was watching a video today of these two, I don't know if they were congresswomen or whatever, just like getting into this fight. And it's like, you're in one of the most important institutions in government, and you sound like you're in a high school cafeteria getting into a fight over something petty. We really need to find more dignity and grace and thus beauty in the way that we do things. Okay, so this is the next thing that I'm going to get into, is like, how do we actually live in a way that is aligned in beauty? But first, let's discuss objectivity versus subjectivity. So this is one of the common beliefs that a lot of people hold without examining it, because we've kind of just accepted this relativistic ethos that there is no objective reality, there is no universality. Things are simply what you think they are, and that's true for you. Like this my truth sentiment. And while there's room for the reality of your subjective perception and your personal preferences, that does not mean that there is no objective reality and that there are no universal truths. And what's so interesting about looking at this through the lens of whether beauty is objective or not is that it's actually such good news that there is objective reality, because it would be really hard for us all to get along, cooperate, and advance as a people if everybody was just vibing out on their own truth, and that was how we had to navigate the world, which is like, okay, I'm going over here, let's figure out what their reality is like, because it's totally upside down and it's whatever they want it to be. Like, oh look, they're flying because in this neighborhood they believe they can fly. Like, that's not how it works, right? If you look at people from different cultures, from different countries, from different times, you actually find a lot more similarity than differences. People still experience sadness, loss. They still fight with each other. They still need to have their basic biological functions like eating and sleeping. They still get sick. They still have religious instincts or religious impulse, the desire to make meaning, story, the desire to love, the desire to protect their families. Like, these things are very universal. And one of those universal things is the experience of beauty and the impact of the experience of beauty. So it's not like there is this culture somewhere where people look at the sunset and they all feel sick to their stomach because it disgusts them. That doesn't exist. And if beauty was truly just inherently subjective, you would find this kind of variation where it's like, oh, actually, these people think the thing that most people think is beautiful is just hideous. And the differences that we do have, like there are personal preferences, there are variations, these things have been blown up so much that we neglect to see how much we actually do have a universal sense of beauty. I mean, the fact that we have artwork that is so old that people still go from their countries to other countries to see for so long is a testament to the universality and the objectivity of beauty. The fact that people can appreciate things across time and across culture very much is a testament to the fact that like beauty is a universal experience that has a universally similar impact on us. It is a good thing for us. There are not people who are like, oh my gosh, I'm allergic to beauty. Beauty, it has a terrible impact on me. It makes me sick. It makes me anxious and depressed. Like, that's not a phenomenon. Okay, so really just the kind of thing is like there's so much that has happened in terms of just like how ideologies warp the way we look at the world and forget that like we're mostly animals. So you can just look at people like animals very often and be like, let's see these specimens. They generally like things that they find beautiful. Are there patterns between which they find things beautiful? Yes. Most people like symmetrical faces. Most people like flowers. These specimens have shared characteristics around what they find beautiful and their experience of it. They find the experience pleasurable and positive. Like, it's really actually that simple, but we've done so much like intellectualizing to complicate the shit out of things that you will ask someone about beauty and they will tell you it's entirely subjective. Which is just like, is that actually your experience? Do you walk around and find a lot of people who are like, beautiful things disgust me? No, you find people who are like, I don't like heavy metal music. Oh, I like country music. Oh, I don't like country music. I like rap. Never mind that everybody's talking about their enjoyment of music. It's the differences in between which type of music that we focus on as an idea that like, oh, beauty is subjective, while ignoring the fact that music is universal. Like, this is a thing that humans universally are inclined to and enjoy. So there's a lot of evidence to the fact that there really is a large objective component to beauty. And I think one of the most interesting one that's like really hard to dispel in terms of, oh, it's socialized into us. It's a relativistic standard by which some cultures find skinny women beautiful and some cultures found overweight women beautiful, and that's why beauty is entirely subjective. And there was a study that found that babies would focus on faces that adults had also been surveyed on and found attractive. Babies, like, I think it was like 3 to 6 months old. Who socialized the babies? Within 3 months, you telling me these babies were like, I obey Western patriarchal beauty standards. No, that is not a strong explanation. What is a much more strong explanation is that there are certain characteristics that human beings find universally beautiful and are drawn toward. And you find this kind of thought in Aristotle's work, which is super interesting because it's like, wow, that is a while back. And you have people making this argument that beauty is objective and that it is actually something that we can use to better understand our world, that understanding beauty helps us to actually understand reality, as opposed to just dismissing it as subjective. I want to read a comment really quick from Alta. Yes, thank you for pointing out similarities between people and that beauty is a universal value. And yes, I too give the example of a sunset. Okay, great. I think the sunset is such a great example because it's just like, nobody is like, the sunset is ugly. Nobody says that. I've never heard that in my life. And one of the things that's so nice about accepting this reality that beauty is largely objective is that then you can appreciate that facet of being a human being. I love seeing how often people want to post sunset pictures. I've never thought like, oh, that's so basic. We don't need to see your sunset picture. On the contrary, I'm like, show me your sunset picture. I too love the sunset. Human beings love the sunset. We find it so beautiful. It is a motif that repeats in art, whether it's poetry or visual art or music or literature. The idea of like sun setting, time passing, all of this, like these things hold meaning to us universally. And of course, they differ a little bit when you start to express it through art, because then you do start to filter things through like time and culture and all of that. But the reality is that there is still this root in objective beauty. And that's what makes it that we can look at art that's centuries and centuries old and was created by someone that has a totally different life experience than us, spoke a different language, lived in a different place at a different time. And yet we can look at a painting and say, this is beautiful. Or we can listen to a song and get the feeling that it's trying to convey. And this is good news. Like I said, it is much better that there is an objective realm for beauty, because it means that we can actually make sense of the world, and that it doesn't have to be like, oh, if you're not in my cultural group, I'm not going to understand anything about you. We will never get along. We will never be able to cooperate because we simply live in different worlds. That's actually not the case. We live in the same world. And that's why we have so many adaptations, like our perception of beauty, that have universal characteristics to it. Okay, so I think that's where I want to leave the objective beauty argument. There's so much more on this, but I don't want to. We got like 30 minutes left on this live stream because I got to do other things, and I want to get through a lot to discuss. So I highly recommend, if you're still kind of unsure about the objective subjective argument around beauty, that you just look it up, because that's all it took for me was just like actually taking some time to look into it and be like, oh yeah, of course, obviously there's literally research that shows humans value similar characteristics and treat them as attractive across cultures. I mean, that is really already strong evidence for the fact that beauty is something we perceive as like universally and has a basis in objective reality. Okay, I'm going to read a comment here from Terry Quist. Hey, Terry, a good case for the elemental nature of beauty. Even when you observe cultural differences in appreciation of beauty, the elements of beauty and the striving after beauty are themselves shared. I love that. Moreover, radical relativism and subjectivism presumes the lack of agency. We are made into objects of cultural processes. Yes, this is a really great and important point about how relativism robs us of our agency, and in some ways also our uniqueness, our individuality, right? Like, you are just the product of your time and place. That's it. You're like this blank canvas, right? Like, that's also the blank slate argument, that humans are simply whatever you make them to be, which of course is one of the fundamental and flawed premises that leads people into this collectivist, authoritarian ideology that believes we can just make people good. We can just make society what we think it should be, because humans are just balls of clay that we can mold based on the circumstances we put them in. And that's where you get into such a dangerous place, where people end up demonizing our differences, demonizing our freedom to differ. And then that leads you into the equity ideology, right? Which is like, it's actually more important to have equal outcomes than it is to allow people to make their own choices, which of course lead to unequal outcomes very often. And you can't have both. You have to choose. Either you allow people to have the freedom to be different and thus to be unequal, or you force people to make the same choices or take things from other people so that everybody ends up in the same place. And so like this idea of actually I was like really thinking about how relativism is one of the less demonized philosophies that we really should be demonizing more. You hear a lot about postmodernism, which of course has a lot of overlap with relativism. But as I was reading up on relativism, I was like, oh, this is way more deeply ingrained in some ways, because postmodernism brings in the kind of like power element of things. It's the idea that, well, what we view as truth has been shaped by some dominant power, and that's why we view it as truth. Whereas my view of relativism's difference is that there is no critique of power necessarily. It's just like, oh, you're in that country or that culture or that region, and thus you are the product of your environment entirely, and your beliefs are no different than the beliefs of the people over there. They're all relative. And so in some ways, like, that really is incompatible with the idea of an objective reality, because if we believe things are relative, then we can't say there is a true good and a true bad. And with all these things, it's like, would be nice if we could kind of take a little wisdom and say, oh, there's some things that are probably relative, like our choices in, I don't know, food or whatever, things like that. Which of course I do believe there's also there's objective traits to analyze food by, because food is in some ways an art also. But nonetheless, you can see that preference angle where some people really like spicy food. I hate spicy food. And I wouldn't say, I would argue, if you give me time, I will argue that spicy food is objectively worse because I think it masks flavor. It's not even a flavor. It's just like, this is burning your mouth. Okay, well, what is the flavor? What are the other flavors? So I will objectively argue that spicy food is not good. But nonetheless, the reality is, like, this is one of those things where we can say there's a spectrum where there's preference, and then there's a spectrum where there's objective assessments. Everybody can objectively agree on whether a thing is edible. So if I bring you a rock and I put that on your plate, it's not subjective whether that's a good meal or not. It's not edible. So that already alone sets an objective standard for food. Is it edible? And that is something, as biological beings, we're all human beings. Yes, you're from that culture. Yes, you're from that region, time, whatever. We're all physically, biologically the same. And so we share that universal trait of seeking food that is edible. So I know this sounds like so weirdly obvious, but this is the kind of thing that you have to dig into to disprove the idea that beauty is just subjective. You have to really take it down to the most basic level and be like, is food subjective? Is the taste of food subjective? Like, do some people eat something and that is inedible and will make you sick and are like, this is good, this food is good? Like, no, we do not have an unlimited range of preference. So don't mistake preference for objective reality. Okay, so let's move along to the next points here. I'm gonna get my notes here because this is a long one. There's a lot to cover. Now, briefly, what is beauty? When we talk about beauty, are we talking about art, or are we talking about physical appearances? Beauty is something that, again, this is what we've lost as a culture in understanding beauty, expands beyond just the realm of art. And so you see this a lot in art, where art describes what is beautiful. So poetry, literature, paintings will describe or portray the beautiful. And while that's done in visual, what do you see in the art that makes the art beautiful because it's portraying the thing? And so it's often like a tender scene, right? So there's art that shows a mother and child or something like that. And so you have that visual element, but what is actually beautiful about the scene? It's not just that it's a good painting, it's the meaning that it conveys. It's the scene that's playing out. And so it's that tenderness between mother and child. And so beauty can be also something that we act upon. It can be something that we embody in that way. And I think that understanding beauty as a practice, a way of being in the world, makes it a lot more clear that it's not just this physical pursuit, but rather a philosophical pursuit. Like, can you live a beautiful life? What does it mean to be a beautiful person? And this is a question that's been like really kind of overdone in art, honestly, in some ways that it's become cliche, but it's cliche because it's so true, which is you can have this physically beautiful person, but a rotten soul, like a malevolent core, and then the person's really not actually that beautiful. They're attractive on the outside, but they don't have a beautiful life. They don't live in a beautiful way. And I think that's what we're really missing in our understanding as a culture of beauty. It's that it's not just how you look. It's not just a pretty picture or something like that. Beauty is a virtue. It is something that you can live in honor of, that you can pursue with action, despite not being an artist. And so, can you treat people in a beautiful way? Can you be a beautiful person in the way that you carry yourself, in the things that you do? My understanding of this is to think of it like, what is the thing that is driving you? Are you being driven by jealousy, by resentment, by hatred, by insecurity, by fear? These are things that are not beautiful. They're not things that bring us the sensation that beauty does. And so if you look at it like that, then there is this way that you can live in a beautiful way. And I'm trying, like, this is, we got so many threads going on here, but what you have to understand about this is when you see people being disingenuous, nasty, dishonest, intentionally antagonistic, twisting people's words, all of these things are not good in the objective, universal sense of the word. They lead us away from virtue. And it's Aristotle's belief that beauty is a kind of symptom of what works, what is fulfilling its highest purpose. And so to be a person who is driven by resentment, who lies to get your way just for the sake of being right, or to dig your heels in so that you don't have to change, these are not the actions of a person who is fulfilling their highest purpose. And thus, they are not beautiful. It is not a beautiful thing to see a person succumbing to these dysfunctional, destructive impulses. And so, if you use beauty as this kind of compass of virtue, it's almost like a secondary element by which you can judge something, as opposed to like the primary virtue, right, which is truth, compassion, kindness, rationality, these things that one could pursue directly as a virtue. When you fail to pursue those things, you fail to also pursue that secondary virtue in a way, because now they are not beautiful. Those are not beautiful things. The flip side of kindness, cruelty, is not beautiful. And so when you fail to be pursuing these higher aims as an individual, you fail to pursue beauty. And so in a way, you can reverse engineer that, which is, what would be the beautiful thing to do in this interaction? What would be the beautiful way to treat this person? And then that's like this backdoor to those primary virtues, which is you might have of truth, authenticity, whatever your primary values might be. And so it's a really interesting and rare way to think about beauty, right? Like, let me know if anybody has really heard of anybody talking about this. I don't know. In some ways, I feel like I've stumbled onto some sacred ancient wisdom, which is insane because one of the philosophers that I was studying for this, Roger Scruton, died in 2020. And I have not heard about him. I really don't see anybody pulling from his works. I don't see him discussed. But don't worry, I will be the one bringing it up. I want to share this comment from Terry. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou sayest. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. Keats. Oh, there you go. That just sums it up perfectly. I can end this segment with that quote. And this is a thing also, right? In some ways, the discussion of beauty, the intellectual tradition around beauty, further confirms that there is an objective quality to beauty, because you have all these different people coming together at different times and discovering the same truth, which is there is something intrinsically valuable in beauty. There is something virtuous about beauty. And so this simply leads you to the conclusion, like, are they just all socialized the same? Did society indoctrinate all of us the same in this year and also centuries and centuries past, and Aristotle too? We all just got indoctrinated into the same societies somehow. Highly unlikely. And also much more depressing analysis, which leads me to my next point about oppressive beauty standards, right? So we've all heard this, and I'm really excited to rip this one apart because I am so tired of the oppressive beauty standards. And I say that as someone who very much myself had problems with oppressive beauty standards, okay? So let's talk about that idea that there are standards of beauty and that they could be oppressive. All right, so the one thing I would already question about that is who is setting the standards for beauty? Is there a beauty standards commissar who sends out a memo to all women of certain ages and tells them, you must now abide by these standards or you shall face punishment? Because I never got that memo. What I did see was other women doing what they thought made them beautiful, and me, a human being, a species noted for its desire to mimic others of its own species, doing exactly that, mimicking other women who I thought were beautiful, and thus I wanted to be like them. Is that a standard that was set by somebody? And is that oppressive? Now, part of the problem is like the desire to assign blame. So when we talk about oppressive beauty standards often, it's this idea that this is something that is done to us. I simply was sitting around innocently, a commercial for some makeup brand came on, some anorexic model was in a bikini and like waving around the lipstick, looking rich and famous, and I was like, I've got to have that lipstick because then people will love me. And so I am just this victim of advertisement, apparently, in this scenario of the oppressive beauty standards world. Now, TVs didn't always exist. So already we can discuss, like, when did the idea of oppressive beauty standards come into existence? Was it when we were able to be reached by advertisers much more readily, and thus we felt the desire much more readily? I don't think that's the case, because you can look throughout history, way before electricity even existed, and you see trends among women who want to be considered attractive and who find different ways to do that, some of which are uncomfortable for them. Like whether it's consuming some kind of thing because they thought it would make them either more fertile or more beautiful, or whatever kind of practices that women indulged in to make themselves more beautiful. A lot of the time, these are not practices that were invented by men and then forced on women. It was women's pretty universal desire to be perceived as attractive, because we are human beings, we are animals. It's our goal to reproduce. At the most core of our being is the goal of reproduction. Whether you consciously have that goal or not, that's what your body wants to do. That's what it's been evolved since you were a cell or whatever to pursue. That drive is incredibly strong. And so in some ways, I think the oppressive beauty standards narrative is an attempt to shift blame away from us and kind of divorce ourselves from the biological reality that women want to be perceived as attractive and men do in their own ways. And this is the normal existence of a species that needs to reproduce. Like, that is what it is. You look to nature, you see the same thing. You think peacocks enjoy carrying around that giant tail that makes them far more easy to kill by a predator? They probably did not sign up for that. Is it an oppressive beauty standard? In some ways, it very much is oppressive, but nobody really set the standard. It's a function of evolution and the constant process of trying to seek a mate. And so rather than dump this on society, like it's society's fault that I want to be perceived as attractive, that I am aware of what may make me be perceived as attractive and that I desire that thing, rather than blame that on society and call it oppression, I find it a lot healthier to take responsibility for that biological desire to be perceived as attractive and to recognize that it's a normal part of being a living thing, not even just being a human. Being a living thing is trying to seek a mate to reproduce with. And so the oppressive beauty standard thing, it's like, turn off the TV. Really though. And I know all the sad stories about like young girls, they're 12, they're watching TV or they're reading the magazines or whatever. And it's like, I want to be super skinny. I'm going to become an anorexic. I was there too. I was during that era. I remember I bought like tall pills. I was like 11 or 12, and I somehow ordered tall pills off the internet because I wanted to be a model and I wanted to be tall because that's what you had to do to be a model. And so apparently I thought in my little underdeveloped brain that you could just take tall pills and that would help. Luckily I never took those. So I was not down that bad that I actually followed through with that plan. But this is more a problem with the malleability and the naivety of young girls than it is with the fact that like, oh, society wants us to be attractive and like we're having the standards forced on us. You're never going to escape that because you're never going to escape the biological impetus to be thought of as attractive. There will be a standard set no matter whether you're living in a cave with a tribe or whether you're living in New York City with an advanced society. Like if you're having a community around you with which you can mate, there's going to be that biological competition by which people try to be more attractive to mates for their success. And that's not something that we can blame on society. And so what happens with the kind of like oppressive beauty standard narrative is that it has gotten so much more dominant that you end up with this backlash, which is the idea of beauty itself somehow gets implicated with this quote unquote oppressive beauty standard. So it's not just that the standards that I'm seeing in my culture by which, oh, women are supposed to be this skinny, or we're supposed to be this tall, or whatever, because that's what's trendy right now. Of course, it's what's trendy with other women, which is the problem that bothers me the most about the oppressive beauty standard thing. It's like, it's women that set these trends. It's women that you're trying to copy. Like, it's not society, some like amorphous blob called society. It's just other women. And when you realize that, like, it just becomes a lot more of a human normal thing, as opposed to this, like, there's an evil system trying to control me and get in my brain, so I buy more nail polish. Like, it's not actually that deep. Like, it's, if you were in a tribe in the jungle, you would still be subject to beauty standards. Sorry. So what happens is that rather than recognizing this and like taking that responsibility and doing what you can to manage yourself so that you don't make it your whole thing, like, I've got to be America's Next Top Model, I'll do anything, like, that's a you problem. Like, that's a you problem that is an opportunity for growth by overcoming, rather than just thinking all of society should change so that I don't feel this pressure to be attractive, which is, like I said, if you're in a tribe in a jungle, you're still going to have that pressure. But nonetheless, the flip side of that is, like, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't throw out beauty as a virtuous thing just because there is this pressure around current trends for beauty. And that's where we've gotten lost as a culture, is that beauty has become so synonymous with oppressive standards that there really is no other narrative around it. And so, of course, what did we do to escape that pressure? We just nuked beauty and told everybody that there's no such thing as objective beauty. No matter what you look like, you are beautiful, because beauty is whatever you want it to be. Well, now nobody can actually enjoy beauty because they don't know what the fuck it is. Because that's not what beauty is. Beauty is not whatever you want it to be, whatever you look at. It has a basis in objective reality. And so this is just a classic overcorrection scenario where we've just thrown beauty out to escape unpleasant standards in society. And so now I'm going to segue into the ideologies that do this, because this is one of the things that I have realized is a really telltale sign of whether an ideology is destructive or not, which is, how does it relate to beauty? And you can actually see this on both the left and the right. It's not something that's unique to the left, though I am going to grill the left because they have done the most damage to it. But my prediction is that you are going to see problems around beauty grow among factions of the right, because at the end of the day, there are political subgroups, both on the left and the right, who prefer controlling people above all. And so they will cut off your connection to objective reality and to your individual ability to ascertain objective reality by telling you that they're the ones that control beauty. They're the ones that define beauty, and that the people out there that don't follow those definitions, they're the baddies. And you don't want to be the baddies, right? So you better fall in line with this definition of what is beauty. And so this just becomes this game of control. And you can kind of see it in some regards when on the right, when it just goes too far into the weird ultra trad, like performative modesty subcultures, where there's so much of this emphasis on, like, I'm a modest woman, I don't wear these demonic fashions, that it's like, hey, cool, bro, no one is saying that you have to do that. Like, just wear the modest fashion and be happy. You don't really seem happy. You seem like you've got a huge chip on your shoulder about it. And that's not really beautiful, is it? So this is, again, the way of using, like, beauty as a like a compass for, it's like, okay, you're telling me that you care about beauty because like, oh, I'm not the left, I care about beauty, but you are a spiteful person who seems to only engage with the concept of beauty as a way to put others down and reinforce tribal lines. That does not fulfill the virtuous role of beauty. So let me attack the left now a little bit, which is, of course, the left is very built around this idea of like relativism that we discussed at the beginning, which is that there really is no objective reality. There is no objective truth. There is simply power and who gets to define the truth. And there is simply society who molds the people to believe what is true and what is good. So obviously I absolutely reject that. I think that's like the most dystopian kind of worldview you can have, because it denies both the individuality and the agency of a person while also advocating for this like system of mass control by which people are shaped into good people by some minority of elites that are supposed to be benevolent. It's just like, that ain't gonna work, and it never has. And so you have this idea on the left as that attacks beauty from this cultural relativistic standpoint, which is trying to get you to deny the idea of an objective reality, because it cannot coexist with that. Because if there is an objective reality and you are a living human being, that means that you yourself have the capacity to discern what is true all by yourself. You don't need the king. You don't need the dictator. You don't need the community political leader to tell you what is true and what is not, because you are capable of ascertaining objective reality. And so in this way, beauty is actually the most subversive concept because it stands in defiance of that desire to push the narrative that everything is simply a social construct and people are inherently moldable, and thus it's our responsibility to mold them in the form of what we believe is good. If there is an objective reality, all of that is pulled into question then, because all of that is no longer necessary. And so this is partly why you see such a demonization of the concept of beauty on the left. And it has manifested in these really unhinged social movements like the body positivity movement that, yeah, sure, at first it kind of seemed more like this, and like everything does. Everything that starts out on the left seems cray at first, and then it fairly quickly snowballs into something absolutely horrific. So we went from body positivity, which was, let's not bully people because they're a little overweight. Does anybody disagree with that? I think that's actually a generally fine belief to hold. But that very quickly turned into being obese is perfectly healthy, and saying otherwise is fat phobic and you're a Nazi. So this is the problem when we cede the idea of an objective reality, because as soon as you give up that like position in the ground, right? Like that like firm standing in the fact that like some things are just true, some things are just good. That is what it is to live in a world with objective reality. As soon as you give that up, anything goes. And so rather than argue from the position of one that acknowledges objective reality, which is like, okay, yes, it's unhealthy to be obese, but it's also unhealthy to bully people because that doesn't necessarily lead them to make healthy choices. They might just kill themselves, or they might just continue to do their unhealthy behavior because they're probably doing it for unhealthy reasons, like being unable to cope with life stressors or like having some kind of like deep-seated sense of unworth. And so bullying them is not going to change that. So that is how one could argue for like the original positive conception of body positivity while being grounded in objective reality. But if you don't make that argument in that way, and you make it in the subjectivist position, which is all bodies are the same. It doesn't make a difference whether you're obese or whether you're skinny. You can be super unhealthy. An obese person can be healthier than a skinny person, and you don't know, so you shouldn't judge. And actually, it's society that creates these values by which we judge bodies. Like, as soon as you start using that as your way to argue against a fine belief, which is, or rather to argue for a fine belief, which is don't bully people just because they're overweight, you just open the door for the crazy shit to come in. And then the crazy shit actually is bad because we're not helping people by lying to them and saying things like, there's no difference in the shape of your body and whether you're significantly overweight. Like, that makes no difference. There's a way to do that in a healthy way, which is you're still a worthwhile person. You still have value as a person. You still are deserving of love from your loved ones who you treat well. Your actions are still the most important thing in determining your life, not simply the number on a scale. Like, there's all these better ways to argue for why you don't have to like hate yourself for being overweight without lying to people about objective reality. And so this is the problem with that. And so of course, like, you have, I could go on the left for absolutely ever, because it's just one of the most anti-beauty ideologies that I've ever seen in this modern conception of it. I mean, you look at modern fashion right now. You look at a lot of like the modern art. Okay, you want to look at the visual art, the banana taped to the wall, the fashion that just looks like it's from a dystopian alien like universe somewhere, and it's like, what is this attractive for? Like, why does this look good? It just looks crazy and different, which is like, oh, okay, that's cool. You built like a jacket that's 50 sizes larger than the person and they look crazy. That's so avant-garde. So yeah, we can do that, but that doesn't make it beautiful. And right, you can see that because, like we discussed art in the beginning, where you can see art from like long centuries and centuries ago, cultures long past, and recognize it as beautiful. It can hit you in the same way because it was tapping into that universal expression of beauty, that universal experience of beauty. Whereas when an artist creates something simply for the sake of subverting a beauty standard, then they're doing the actual opposite, which is, okay, so here's what people seem to universally think is beautiful. I'm going to do the opposite of that. Well, congratulations, you've invented ugly, because that's why people mostly don't like that thing and choose the other thing, is because the other thing is universally considered beautiful. So that is, congratulations, you've reverse engineered beauty to make something ugly, as if that is novel. So this is a lot of the problem with like the relativistic ethos that has permeated our culture, as well as the kind of like fake counterculture perspective, which is, I've got to oppose everything that's traditional, and no genuine understanding of why things might be traditional, right? So we're talking about the idea of traditional beauty and how beauty has been lost as a concept in our culture, largely because of these backlashes against quote unquote tradition. But the reality is that traditions are very often grounded in something that people have figured out again and again and again until it finally stuck. And so just unsticking those things and throwing them out without examining, like, okay, what is it that makes this thing stick? Why has this form appeared, or why has this type of music or art or idea or form of expression recurred and stuck for so long. And this is where you get the lazy explanation, like it's just oppressive, or it's just some kind of like everything in the old times is all racist or patriarchal or terrible, and thus it should all be thrown out. That is not a true reading of human history. And thus, when someone does that, they've lost the truth that was in that thing. And so that's where you get this crazy art culture we have now, where so much of it is just kind of like, haha, I made ugly things. It's like, we're just waiting desperately for something actually beautiful to be made instead of subverting everything. And that's what's so funny about our position in culture right now, is that beauty is actually what has become subversive. Because when you have a culture that has built up so much of this ethos around there being no objective beauty, or rather that the idea of objective beauty is oppressive, then the only way to be countercultural is to actually subvert that ethos, is to actually embrace the idea of objective beauty. Let me read a comment from Terry. Good question to your opponents in this dialogue. You get perfect equity. What do you do then, and why? That is a great question, because as we know, equity is the idea that people should have equal outcomes. And so if you have equal outcomes, you've had to do a lot of engineering of your population to stop them from making different choices, or to quote unquote level the playing field by usually redistributing assets or wealth, or preventing some people from having certain opportunities, or some people from making other choices, or whatever, all these different mechanisms by which we would have equitable outcomes. But then what do you do then? Do you continue to just maintain that everybody has to have the equal outcomes? Or do you then let people make choices and then very quickly find out that people make different choices and thus end up in different positions in life? That is a question that I cannot answer, because I do not want an equitable society. I would like an equal society. Let me read some more comments. Understanding history rather than trying to reinvent the wheel for the novelty of recency. Yeah, that is not understanding why the wheel was invented is the first mistake in trying to reinvent the wheel. Like, the wheel is there. Let's understand the wheel first before we throw it out and be like, what if we made the tire a square? That just sums up so much of the contemporary art world right now. It's like, what if we made the tire a square? It's like, that would be so different. Yeah, that would be so different and terrible, but really different. Good job, guys. The left has genuinely betrayed the people who wanted to trust it. Yep, very true. I am one of those people. Oh, thank you. Salome is always looking stunning. I can't lie. Thank you. I thought I would put on my nice velvet dress to discuss beauty. It felt appropriate. Let me see if there's any more comments. I have a hard time believing beauty is objective. Don't beauty standards change over time with culture? Yes, great point. So that would be the difference between personal preferences, like subjective personal preferences, or like those genuine differences that occur within culture, right? Like, you can think of those cultures that have like the rings on the neck. I forget what tribe that is and where they are and whatever, but I think everybody's seen that picture of that tribe, that the women place these like rings on their neck that like slowly expand their neck like beyond what the normal length would be. And of course we might look at that and be like, oh my gosh, that's so extreme. That's so even oppressive. Some might say that women have to do those kind of body modifications to themselves. And I don't find that attractive at all. It looks weird. They don't really like it. I don't find it attractive. And that is the kind of like realm where you do have these differences. You do have this kind of like somewhat more subjective preferences around beauty. But nonetheless, I would argue that there's still this objective root very often, because long necks for women generally is considered attractive. So like if I sit like this, that doesn't look as good. And so anytime that I'm doing anything, I try to put my shoulders back and put them down and then sit up straight, because it looks better, more refined, more, I don't know, like you're more streamlined to have that longer silhouette on the neck and to have your shoulders back, as opposed to kind of this like hunched up situation. So even though I don't have the preference, right, like the subjective preference that, okay, I want my neck to be so long that it's abnormally long, and I'm going to use devices to stretch it beyond the normal length, you can see how there is still this grounding in like, okay, well, there is something still attractive about refined like neck on a woman. And so I think that's a good example of how you can differentiate between the variety between humans, right? Which is like why the philosophy of relativism was probably so popular, is that there is this grain of truth, is that there are differences that are more culturally constructed between different groups of human beings. But that doesn't go all the way to then negate the existence of an objective reality. And I really think that is where we have gotten lost, in feeling like we have to pick one or the other, where it's like, no, everything is fully based in objectivity. There are no personal preferences in beauty. There is no subjectivity whatsoever. That's just clearly false, because there are people who have preferences that I don't share, like for music. Now, again, the thing is that those preferences are still contained within a general objective reality. And so music is still recognized as music. Like it is, there's a definition around what is music, and there is like the spectrum of what music do we all kind of enjoy. Like if I just, I don't know, like if I just hit a car horn for 5 minutes and I was like, I just released my new track, guys, check out my album. It is 10 hours of a bunch of different songs where I hit the car horn and I just hold it. Is that music? I would say, no, it's not music. And we all know that that's not music. That's a sound. So music has a certain order to it, certain rhythm. And like this goes back to the Aristotelian view of beauty, which is it is in sync with the natural reality in a way that helps us understand the natural reality. And so I think one of the things that Aristotle says about beauty is that like, oh, it's in harmony with things. Like he talks about it as a harmonious existence. So like when a thing is harmonious and when it's functioning as it should, it is beautiful. And so in that way, like you can call things that maybe you wouldn't normally talk about them as beautiful, like a car is running beautifully because it's running at peak performance and it's got like all this great mechanics that makes it work super well and whatever. And like in some way, this is beautiful. And I think that's such a fascinating way to look at beauty, is that it is tied to action in a way, into like whether we are doing things right, whether we're doing things well, and excellence. And that's in some ways like there really is something in us that we have this universal perception of something going well as beautiful. I think you also get this coming out a little bit in the sports realm, where people just love to see someone like make that shot, you know, like what is actually going on there when human beings so universally are invested in and pleased when someone perfectly executes a certain move, a move that's kind of nonsense, right? Because it's like, oh, look, I threw that ball through that hoop. that was awesome. It's like, who cares about throwing the ball through the hoop? I actually don't really care about throwing the ball through the hoop. I'm not like a sports person. So I really genuinely am like, okay, why does the ball need to be through the hoop? I don't care about that. Like, that's not useful to me. But nonetheless, there is more this clearly universal appreciation for people that can get the ball through the hoop. And so I think that's like a good example of like the difference between subjectivism and objectivism in beauty. Like, I would look at it as more of a spectrum that contains those subjective preferences within a more objective range. Like, there are very few scenarios where people do some like horrific body modification to themselves and a large group is like, yes, that's very beautiful. I feel like that is wonderful. Usually we have to also discern out, like, there are aberrations, right? Like, people will always say this, they'll bring up, like, oh, how can there be objective morality when some people are serial killers? Well, those people are fucked. They're not well. Do not judge human beings as a species by the dysfunctional outliers. You're going to get a really skewed response. Just similarly, like, okay, if I'm going to tell you, what is it like to own a dog? And I tell you the experience of owning the world's sickest, most aggressive, most disabled dog, you're gonna think, oh my gosh, dogs are terrible. Why does anybody have a dog? Well, I just gave you the most outlier explanation for the norm, but that's not the norm. So I think if you look at things more like in that range of what is the normal range of what people generally perceive as beautiful, it's very consistent. It's not like, oh, these people really find this super weird, ugly thing beautiful, and these people find flowers beautiful only. It's not actually that realm, that weird. Like, you can think of it in terms of, like, if it was like that, there would be so much more wide-ranging differences between people than there actually is. Like, it would look like The Fifth Element or something. You know that movie where there's all these different species and they're all super different. They all have crazy different customs. They all have unintelligibly different languages and behaviors, and they all look like crazy. We would have varied so much if we didn't have that kind of more objective range that we're all within, that we would look like we were all from different planets. But we are actually not that different. You see differences in clothes or whatever, and differences in music and differences in food. But the fact that all those things are functions of culture is universal. So the things are couched within the universals like that. Okay, let me get back to... No, I don't think it's like a leftist argument, actually, because it's a common way to argue when you're talking about research, is that you don't take the extremes as part of your sample set, because it skews your sample set. So I'm not saying that those are part of my argument, but that would be like a way that you would end up skewing how you understand something if you take the most extreme and say this is representative of the whole, of the norm. And so yeah, I would not do that in your understanding of beauty, because it will lead you to a very skewed understanding of beauty, which, yeah, in some ways is kind of like the thing that you might see a leftist do, or just like a person that's not arguing rationally. I think that's one of the things that's very helpful in some ways for me for understanding beauty is my small but like substantial in some ways background in studying like just history and anthropology, because it was so clear. It was like, oh wow, humans, we're kind of animals, and we have very similar patterns that recur despite time, place, culture. There are a lot more similarities than differences. And so we really discount those similarities often because that's just how we think. We focus on the differences. And it's incredible when you think about like how much we actually focus on the differences, even within our own political groups or our own religious groups. Like, you'll still have these factions within factions, and those factions will just tell you like, oh, they're the worst, or they're super wrong because of this. And it's like, to people that are outside of your group that you guys are a faction of, y'all look the same. Like, we do not see all of the like serious differences that you see within your group. And so that's the thing. In so many ways, we are a lot more similar than we are different. All right, let's get ready to wrap up with some of the consequences of a culture that doesn't understand beauty, and then just some thoughts on how to live a life that honors beauty, that takes beauty into account as a virtue rather than just this state of being of like, oh, I did my hair well, I look beautiful today. Something deeper than that. So one of the things that I think we're really suffering from as a culture is that lack of understanding for beauty as being a transcendent experience, something that uplifts, something that helps us to feel more inspired. It's really not what we often hear about it, like all these negative things where it's like, oh, it's such an oppressive standard. Oh, I don't want to have to feel beautiful. I feel like I'm being judged or whatever, like these kind of things. Those are personal problems, like really. And I can have sympathy for those personal problems. I've dealt with them. I deal with them. Like, it's a normal part of being a human being. It's a normal part of like being a woman that cares about being attractive. Like, that's just what it is. But it's something we have to take responsibility for as individuals, because we're all going to have those things where we are comparing ourselves to others, or we want to look a different way. Like, in some ways, it is just the most natural thing in the world to just judge your human body and want it to be different and think things would be better if it was slightly different, because the human body is this manifestation of our mortality. And if we could just shape our body, maybe we could shape our mortality. And so I think there's like a lot of far deeper things going on than just oppressive beauty standards when we express discontent with our relationship to beauty. But I also think it's very flat in some ways because of that relativism that has made beauty just seem like, oh, it's just entirely subjective. There's nothing to discuss because the way you see beauty is totally different from the way I see beauty. So, we can compare notes, but in the end, it really doesn't make a difference because it's whatever you want it to be. That robs us of the ability to connect with this like higher order experience, these collective experiences of awe, of inspiration, the kind of things that you feel when you are at a concert maybe, or some other experience where you're with other people and there's something that leads you towards a sense of unity, a sense of being uplifted, a sense of humans can do good things. These are the things that beauty is all wrapped up with and helps us to feel. So you can think of how people used to build these old cathedrals and or these really beautiful mosques that have all this stained glass or all this incredible ornate painting in it. And, why? Why spend all that time to make something so wildly beautiful? It's an incredible amount of effort, but it's largely because of what the building signified. It was a place of worship. It was a place of focus on something bigger than oneself and the divine. And so, very interestingly, when humans conceive of the divine, of the transcendent, they conceive of it as something that deserves beauty, is honored through beauty, is beautiful. And thus you end up with these religious buildings that are just incredibly beautiful and ornate. And so if we don't have that pathway to experiencing and creating beauty anymore, because we're not making the Costco a monument to God, which I don't know, maybe we should, but if we're not doing that, then where do we get that sense of communal, right? It's not just me as an individual. We'll discuss that too, because that is part of the need for beauty is on an individual level, but it's also like on a communal level where everybody agrees this thing is beautiful, this thing is taking us towards a higher aim, this thing represents the higher ideals that we have, the transcendence that we want to reach. We don't really have that. I think the most we can get from that is like places that have been constructed solely with beauty in mind, like certain kinds of gardens or art museums that also try to house themselves within beautiful constructions. And the problem there is that you see this kind of relativism and this false counterculture belief system shape what gets selected as beautiful. So there's a museum near me in DC that I was driving by and I was like, what the hell is that building? Is so ugly. Like, it's just this weird circle. It looks like the panopticon, you know, like you have like the prisons inside and there's like a warden watching everybody. It was just like, what an ominous looking weird construction. It just looks like a giant block of concrete. And then I realized it was a museum and I was just like, why are y'all doing this? Like, just build a beautiful building. I don't want to see like, haha, look, we build a giant concrete circle, because you don't normally see buildings as a giant concrete circle, right? So look what we did. This is different. It's like, yeah, and it's bad. There's a reason people didn't build buildings as just a giant weird circle with like nothing on it, just like this nondescript cylinder. It looks like a prison and it's a museum. And so it's such a great example of like when we aren't guided by that sense of like, okay, what is beauty? What is the purpose of beauty? What does it do for us? And as I described, like all these elements like self-transcendence, focus on like higher ideals, the good in humanity of what we can achieve. And instead you're just trying to be counterculture or like edgy or do something like subvert the past, and you end up building a fucking prison for your art museum because, hey, I'm subverting the norms around construction by building this ugly block of cement. And so that is, again, a place that we get robbed of an opportunity to experience what beauty does for us. So now when I drive past that ugly building, instead of getting the experience that I get when I drive past a beautiful building where it's like, wow, that is amazing. I can't believe someone was able to build that. Wow, that thing is so gorgeous. Like, oh, look at all the details on that. Or like, oh, wow, that building just has like such a unique look to it. It's so eye-catching. It's really such a marvel to look at. And it's such a testament to the human ability to create these grand structures. Instead of having that experience, I drive past this building. I'm like, there's the art prison. There's the artwork prison. And so I do not get that experience of beauty. So all the people that then drive past that building get robbed of just that moment where they could look at something and say, humans can do good things. That's nice. This is a nice part of the city. It seems very mundane, but these are the things that build up over time. And so we actually published an article about this on The Black Sheep. So you can check that out. Go to wetheblacksheep.com. It's a great read by one of our guest authors who broke down this exact phenomenon where it's like we see all these like uglier things in society, uglier buildings, uglier advertisements, people doing like crazy plastic surgery things to themselves that then make them look ugly, and just all these different things that it's like we innately feel alienated by, that it's like something's not right about this. That does not bring me the sense of inspiration or transcendent that beauty normally does. And so why is this happening? And what do we need to do to not have this happen is what you can read in that article at wetheblacksheep.com. But nonetheless, you can't go out and build all the nice buildings. I know that is not a solution that we can quickly jump on, though. I don't know. I think we should try to figure out how to build nicer buildings. I don't know what the process would be around that, but it would be nice if we had some actually beautiful buildings around. But nonetheless, you can still have beauty in your individual life. And what is so great about that and taking that seriously is that then you become a vessel for beauty in the lives of the people around you. And so let me give you a really simple example, which is holiday decorations. This is something that I realized this year actually brings me so much joy. And it's not my decorations. I love putting up my decorations. They do bring me joy, but it's other people's decorations that really make me happy, because whether it's Halloween or it's Christmas, I love driving by or walking by somebody's house and seeing the decorations that they put out, because it's this exercise in care. They cared enough to do this. And it's also, in a way, something they do for others. Because when you put those decorations outside, like those kind, you're not outside all the time. So really, it actually is this expression of community involvement. Like, I'm going to put this aesthetic experience out here for you, because you people outside are the ones that are mostly going to see this, because I don't spend a lot of time entering my front door. So all those decorations out there are for the benefit of the people outside. And so I realized, like, as I thought it through, I was like, oh my gosh, why do I love walking by a well-decorated like holiday house? What is it besides just the fact that like it's nicely decorated? And I realized because they care. That's it. Like there's that effort to care. And then there's the like this shared experience that we are both valuing the same aesthetic experience, which is like putting out the pumpkins or putting out the Christmas lights or whatever it is. That really brings this sense of something bigger than you. And it really, I know it's not God, right? We're not talking about the church or whatever, but it's just this one step up, which is now instead of just being in your own little world, you can think about how the person over there is also participating in that holiday with you and also enjoys putting out their decorations. And so you get that sense of a communal experience of something aesthetically pleasing. I know that seems really in the weeds, but of course, if we're going to psychoanalyze decorations and like dissect the philosophy of beauty that comes through Halloween decorations, is going to get in the weeds. And so this actually is something that you can do too. I'm a huge proponent of people decorating for the holidays and leaving up the decorations. I still have my Christmas decorations up. They stay up until February. And then in February, we switch to Valentine's decorations, which are up the whole month. Because why not? Why not add something novel and enjoyable and eye-catching and fun and lighthearted to my environment? You have only so many Christmases, only so many Valentine's Days in your life. So these are opportunities to engage with beauty. And I think it's really cool if you take some time to look back in the past at like how people used to decorate or whatever, and like how these traditions used to be enacted. In some ways, they're way more simple. Like you'll look at the Christmas trees from, I think, the 1940s or the 1950s, and they are so ugly. I have never seen anything like that in my life. I highly recommend you look up those old vintage Christmas trees and somebody tell me what the hell was going on with those Christmas trees, because our Christmas trees are incredible now. I cannot believe what they were doing back in the past. But nonetheless, they still did the holiday decorations. And like, you know, there was the passing out of little Valentine's Day cards and all these kind of little experiences that have this aesthetic component, right? Because they're synced in with a holiday that has like its own aesthetic palette with it, like Valentine's Day, the pink and whatever. So decorating, curating your own environment, like your home, how you dress. Like this is another thing that I think is actually weirdly underappreciated as a vessel for beauty, right? Because so often in our culture, we think about beauty as a thing that I want. I want to be beautiful. So I'm going to do things to make me look good. But what I have started to realize is that my appearance is somebody else's experience as well. And in that way, the way that I make myself look is impacting the people around me. And so dressing up, looking groomed, nice, whatever, put together, these are things that help to uplift just ever so slightly. I'm not saying I'm having that of an amazing impact on other people, but isn't that kind of like the vibe that you get when you go to a fancier restaurant or something and everybody's dressed up? That creates this other element of, you know, just uplifting people and like a sense of formality. Like people have put in effort. This is more special because of that effort. And so that's really something that we can do both for ourselves, but we can also kind of reverse engineer it for ourselves. And instead of making it this like, I don't want to get dressed, like I don't feel like looking nice today, I don't feel like putting on my jewelry or whatever it is, which fair enough, like I didn't feel like putting on all of this. Like every time I do a live stream, I'm like, I don't want to do it. But then the reality is like I'm sitting here on camera and I'm asking people to listen to me. And so do I not owe you somewhat of a nicer aesthetic experience? If you're going to sit here and look at a screen, why not have it be of me looking closer to my best than me representing myself as like, this was not my priority. My appearance was my last priority today. I'm in sweatpants. I did no makeup. I did not put on my jewelry. I did not do my hair. Like in some ways, that just gives me the sense of, okay, are you doing well? Like, is there other things going on that are a problem? There's like too much on your plate or something like that. Taking the time for some level of curating your physical appearance is one of these things that like lets us feel good about ourselves and then also shows other people like, I feel good about myself. We can feel good together. Like we're in this more uplifted environment. I mean, to take it to like a more, I guess like clear example is when you see someone whose clothes are ripped, who looks dirty, who looks disheveled, does it not kind of make you feel bad for them? Usually those are signs that that person is not doing very well. And then when you see someone that looks good, like I said, like going to like a restaurant where people are more dressed up, it makes you feel a little bit better for being in that environment. So the way that we present ourselves can have an impact on others. And I'm not saying like, oh, if you are having a terrible time and you just ran out, your house is on fire and your clothes got on fire, you better change because you are impacting others. Like obviously be normal about this advice. And I think this is why beauty has been so lost in our culture, because people cannot be normal about this kind of advice. Like we have not been able to find a healthy, normal middle ground by which we say, it's actually nice if you take care of your physical appearance in a way that impacts others in a positive way. And so this, I'm going to toss a bone to my modesty girls who are real about the modesty movement, which I don't totally resonate with, like, because like I said earlier, there's a little bit of like a really intense vibe around like, I have to be modest. And I'm like, that doesn't feel very lighthearted. It feels very intense and resentful. But for the women that really enjoy that, right? Like enjoy that experience of dressing in a more modest way, which I'm kind of in the middle there myself in some regards. So I'm going to give them props because there is a consideration of the impact of your appearance on other people. And I don't know if I'm the only one. I doubt it. But like, if you've ever been out in public with your child or your parents and like there is someone just wearing something that is so inappropriate and it's like, we're not at the club. We're here for breakfast in a very normal family friendly place. Like, I did not expect your whole ass to be out in the breakfast joint. Awkward. Like, that is an experience where, to me, it's very much, the person might think that they are making themselves look good and they're really like, yeah, I look great, but they have not considered the impact of their look on more people than just like, I want to be hot for this one guy, or I want to be considered hot, whatever. Like, it's more holistic than that. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that we have lost in a way in terms of the consideration of beauty in fashion, right? So there's definitely concern for how we look and fashion, but is it guided by beauty? Or is it guided by something else? Like I described, you have that like countercultural fashion where it's just like, I've made a jacket that's 50 sizes bigger than the person wearing it, and now they look like a crazy astronaut. It's on the runway. And sure, that's interesting and fun to look at, but I don't find it beautiful. I don't think it speaks to something that's enduring and universally recognized as like, wow, that's really a human at their best, you know, wearing a giant like oversized jacket that you can't, their head is like this little in it and they got this like alien vibe going. It's like, that doesn't really speak to any of the universal impacts that objective beauty have. At that point, it's kind of more of just like a fun fashion experiment, which can be its thing. But do we have a realm in which we experience fashion through the lens of objective beauty? I don't think we have that. I think we've largely lost that understanding of what is the purpose of beauty and how can we pursue that purpose through these different mechanisms, like fashion, like art, like the way that we actually just live our lives. And so that's the other extreme, right? It's just like dressing in such a provocative way in a more public space where there's going to be people that are really not doing the same thing that you're doing, not on that same vibe, like it's not the club, that really is anti-beauty in that way. Like, you might look hot, but it's not the same as beauty. Beauty is something that brings that sense of inspiration, that sense of like, wow, that person is really at their best, like this kind of like admiration. And you had a lot of this during the era where people just wore suits everywhere. Like this one goes for the men, like, wear the suits, bring out the suits. I really believe that it would be nice if we got back to that slightly more formal standard for the way that we dressed. I think it's so fascinating that there was this time in culture where men wore suits kind of as their everyday going about, like they wore their slacks if they were, you know, in the neighborhood or whatever, but it wasn't as casual as things are now. And, you know, there's so many implications of like what that does to a culture that everybody's kind of like dressing down all the time. And we won't go into that because there's too many. But nonetheless, like all of this is to say, your appearance is a vessel for beauty that you can convey to other people. And I think that's a very powerful way to look at it, because then it's something that you can do for others. It's not just for yourself. And I know some women have issues with their sense of like being perceived as attractive, like they don't want to be looked at, they feel objectified, like things like this. And I've found that if you think about it less in terms of like, oh, I'm being objectified, like people are like ogling me or whatever, and you're just dressing as like a way to add beauty to the world, the whole thing becomes a lot more wholesome. And again, this is potentially one of the impacts of losing beauty in our culture, is that we are not wholesome anymore because we are not pursuing the virtue of beauty. And beauty is, by definition, a wholesome thing, a thing of beauty, of like transcendence, of inspiration. And we very much lack that in our conception of beauty. So much of it is just like wrapped up with sexiness, which is not the same as beauty. And so to wrap up, I would love to hear if anybody has their own ideas of how to add beauty to life, because I think it's kind of like curating your life. It's like you've heard that advice, like romanticize your life, and it very much is look at your life as an aesthetic endeavor as well, not just an intellectual one, not just one that is in pursuit of career and whatever, but an aesthetic experience as well. And so when you can, like, put flowers around or do something nice for your own setting. If you realize, like, wait, my walls are really bare, get like a very basic painting from the thrift store, something like. There's actually so many great pieces of art at the thrift store. Usually it's just like random stuff, but oftentimes that's fine. Like, it'll just be like some painting of a boat on the ocean. I love a boat on the ocean. A good painting of a boat on the ocean is fine by me. Put it up in the hallway if you have no art there. You know, you can get that for $5. Very simple way to just add this aesthetic element to your life. But perhaps most importantly, besides this kind of like more visual manifestation of beauty, is to recall this deeper philosophy around beauty, which is that beauty is ultimately a virtue. It is the pursuit and expression of our highest way of being, what is good about people, what is uplifting, what is transcending, what is inspiring, what is admirable. So like these kind of things that get us out of our like narrow vision of like, I've got to do the groceries and and like bring us that sense of pause and appreciation for living. Like, those are usually the things that are beautiful, whether it's like a beautiful behavior where someone is kind, or a beautiful scene where you see just like a perfect sunset, or you see some like person that just looks really well dressed and pleasant and nice, and it's like, oh wow, that person just seems so beautiful and nice. Like things like this that just uplift our day-to-day lives. We can be that, and part of being that is pursuing your other virtues, so the things that matter to you, besides just beauty, and knowing what those things are, of course, which that might be truth or generosity or discipline or excellence or rationality, all these kind of values. When someone is really in sync with their values and is pursuing them and is aligned with the vision that they want for their life, that is almost impossible that you are not inspiring and uplifting the people around you, because you are creating that secondary effect of beauty by which people come to admire and appreciate and feel uplifted in your presence. Why? Because you're being kind, because you're telling the truth, because you're inspiring them with your discipline, because you're expressing the rationality that is often so rare. You're actually trying to understand things. Like, all of these things are little pathways that we can add more beauty as opposed to ugliness in our world. And so I think sometimes it's like kind of abstract to understand what action is correlated with beauty. But what's less abstract is to think about it in terms of what's ugly, and then let me not do that. Let me do the opposite of that. Because that, in some ways, our negativity bias leads us to be much more connected to what's ugly. And we get that immediate sense of like, oh yeah, I don't like that. That's the thing you want to do the opposite of. Because those are the things that are doing the opposite of beauty. They're reminding us of how bad humans can be, what it looks like when someone succumbs to their resentment, their anger, these kind of like lesser versions of ourselves. Those are the things that make us unmotivated, cynical, and not inspired. So you can do the opposite of that and be that kind of like beacon of beauty, of what is good, what is transcendent, what is uplifting. And so go forth and be beautiful. It feels so like funny to say that because the concept of beauty is so divorced from the idea of beauty as a virtue. So be beautiful, but like be beautiful is honestly such a great slogan. Like be beautiful. Isn't that just great actually? That it really is that, because when you understand what beauty as a virtue signifies, then why wouldn't you want to be beautiful? And of course, what would be better than just going forth and being beautiful, adding beauty to the world. So I love that. Let me read this comment. Not being an eyesore, not smelling really bad is showing you care about yourself and about your impact on other people. The context of the situation matters. Bring the suits back, please. The suits, I'm saying, I don't know what to do about it because it seems like we're so far past that time. But maybe it'll just come around back, a full cycle, as often happens. I get joy when I see beautiful community murals, painting, or graffiti. It brings more life to my city. Yes, I love that. That is a great example of just like things that are kind of small, right? It's actually not that crazy of an endeavor to paint a mural on the side of a building, but it's that effort that shows, what would be otherwise just this empty space. Someone took it and made something creative with it, took the time to add something to that area that would bring that sense of joy and upliftedness to another person. That is it. That is beautiful. Humans can do good things is exactly how I feel when I see beautiful art, films, music, etc. It restores my faith in humanity. Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. And it's like that feeling of having your faith in humanity restored when you see like a good movie or listen to good music. That's such a universal experience. Like you are not the only one. That is exactly what happens to me. And it happens to me so often that I schedule time in my schedule just to sit and listen to music, because it's very easy for me to like, oh, I'll do it later. I'll listen to it in the car, whatever. But I've realized like, no, I need to sit and just fully absorb music and get into it because it's such a restorative, uplifting experience. And that's really what good art does. It washes away that dust of like the mundane and all the ugly things that we have to see and deal with, because that's part of life, right? The ugliest part of life. But that's why we need the beauty too, because it brings that balance where it's like, okay, yeah, there's so much that's ugly and hard, but then you see that beauty and it reminds you of how much good there is and like all the good that humans can do. So it's a very important part of life. And I think like the less we have this experience, and the more it becomes this thing where like, it's all up to you to seek it out. Like I've got to set the time in my schedule for beauty because there are no community rituals where it's like, it's time to go to the parade where we're going to throw flowers and celebrate the spring god or whatever. Those communal experiences of celebrating something big and good and transcendent by creating a beautiful scene with music and flowers and dancing, whatever. We don't have that. You have to seek it out because we don't have a unified culture. We live in a pluralistic society where you're free to create even your own rituals, but then you have to do it. And I think that's the weird part of where we're at in the society. And I know people end up blaming like, oh, it's the fault of individualism. And it's like, no, let's not repeat mistakes. Individualism is why culture's problems don't get thrust onto you and you have no right to object to them, because you have the right to decide, actually, I don't want to do that ritual. I think that ritual is really bad and it's part of it is requires sacrifice or some weird thing, and I'm not going to do it. And so that's the freedom that we have to define our own life and choose our own way. But of course, then we're left with the responsibility of filling in the gaps where it's like, okay, but you might still need a ritual for something beautiful, some community activity, something where you feel united with other people for some good cause. And I think we're in this place where we have to realize that you've got to be the one to decide what your culture is going to be, what your ritual is going to be, what your beliefs are, what your values are, how are you going to pursue them, how committed are you going to be to them. And these are the things that, like, it's the classic concept of with freedom comes responsibility. And it's not just the responsibility to protect freedom, as is often thought. It's actually just the responsibility to live your life. You are responsible for yourself, which is so wonderful, but it is also a responsibility. And so that's where we are. And I think this is the problem that we're facing with beauty, is that we haven't figured out that there's a lot of things that, yes, we're now free from the cultural practices or the beliefs that had their problems. And so now we're free to determine our own lives. But at the same time, that didn't mean that all the things in the past were all bad and should just wholesale be thrown out. A lot of these things had some part of them that was created for a reason. And now we are in the process of realizing, actually, I think we need more communal dances. I think we actually need more like myth-making processes by which we can think through things in terms of stories and not just like, oh, here's the facts, because we think in stories. And that's why religion is so powerful. And so that is the process. You got to steer your own ship now. All right, everyone, I am gonna call it quits here. Let me remind you that you can watch the full video if you came in at the end on wetheblacksheep.com. It will be posted right away there. And you can also subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. And I will see you on Friday when I'm going to do my good news roundup so that we can spend some time talking about things that are good. Because I think that's part of bringing more beauty into the world, is also paying attention to the things that are good so that we can maximize the space they take up in our culture. Thank you so much for your comments, guys, for participating. I really enjoyed seeing your thoughts, whether I got to shout out your comments or not. I was reading them, and glad to have you all. It's really fun to find other people that appreciate what I think is kind of a complex and esoteric concept. It really gives me hope that you guys resonated with this idea of beauty as a virtue. So I leave you with that. Go forth and be beautiful.